Close your eyes and think about a carefree, old-school summer day growing up. What do you picture? Many people would say staying outside all day and shooting hoops. Maybe you picture yourself out in nature, catching frogs, playing with friends, riding bikes, running through the sprinkler, or staying in the pool, finally making your way back home at dark when there's no more time to play. And nothing topped off a day like that more than hearing the ice cream truck pull into your neighborhood. In contrast to that innocence, when parents started teaching their kids about stranger danger, ice cream trucks would be among the examples they would use about how someone might try to kidnap you. Watch out for the man with candy in the white van, or the man who lost his puppy and needs your help, or the man in the ice cream truck. But what was largely a trope in a failed messaging campaign to keep kids safe became a real-life nightmare for two families. Two young girls in opposite sides of the country, 13 years apart, heard the sound of the ice cream truck, and in chasing after it, they were never seen again. My name is Megan, and each week on A Simpler Time True Crime, I cover older unsolved cases and challenge the idea that a simpler time means a safer time. This week, I'm bringing to you the unsolved disappearances of Equilla Hodrick and Mikelle Biggs. It was the evening of August 12th, 1985, around 6:30 p.m. It was a hot night for 8-year-old Equilla Hodrick and her 28-year-old mother, Tarona, who went by Terry. The mother-daughter duo was super close-knit. Having Equilla young, Equilla was by Terry's side as she blossomed into the responsibilities of adulthood and forged her own path. And though they had been through many changes, they always had each other. And soon they would have one more. Terry was 8 months pregnant in August of 1985. The two lived in the Kingsbridge Heights neighborhood of the Bronx on Briggs Avenue near 194th Street. This area and this particular block had a bit of a reputation at the time for being kind of rough. In fact, in the early 1980s, there was a TV show called Our Block, and this part of Briggs Ave was featured to give a feel for it. You can actually find old clips of it on YouTube, and you can really see how it was then. You could tell it was an area that people had long-standing history and roots, a sense of community, but it was far from free of crime. Still, neighbors knew each other and they looked out for one another and their kids. Even for August, it was hotter than usual, still in the mid-90s, even into the evening. And in this busy city neighborhood, it felt sweltering. As someone who was also 8 months pregnant during an unseasonably warm August, I feel for Terry Hodrick. It's hard to get the energy to do anything. So what she did was go out and sit on the porch with Equilla, hoping maybe they could catch a gentle breeze. As they were sitting there, neighbors and friends passed by, and some stopped to talk. As adults tend to do, they got to talking, and like a typical kid, Equilla found this to be a real snooze fest. She was growing restless when suddenly she heard a sound that piqued her interest: the neighborhood ice cream truck. As a side commentary here, I am someone who does not drive when I visit New York City. I'm a public transportation only kind of gal because driving in New York City is terrifying to me. And I cannot even begin to imagine what it was like to drive an ice cream truck through New York City streets and try to park and have all these kids trying to run up and get ice cream while you're parallel parking your awkward boxy ice cream truck. I would rather walk through a room of Legos. But I'm sure he made bank on that hot August summer, and it was probably well worth the frustration of driving an ice cream truck through New York City. And apparently he had a pretty regular spot he parked in because Equilla knew right where that sound was headed. It was the Mr. Softy ice cream truck that parked just around the corner on 194th Street. Equilla, who was exactly a week out from her 9th birthday, begged her mom for some change to go to the ice cream truck, interrupting the adult conversation. Terry reminded Equilla that she had already given her some change earlier that day, and that was that. The answer was no more. Equilla was determined, though, so she ran down the porch towards the ice cream truck anyways. Some sources refer to Equilla and her mom getting in a fight about this, but I don't have the sense based on the tone and the way it's otherwise been described that this was the case. I think Equilla Hodrick said no to Equilla, and she thought to herself, okay, this is my first no. Let me see if I can manage to get any other spare change or find another way to get myself some ice cream. Terry did not and frankly could not go chasing after her, but she wasn't worried. Equilla was a fiercely independent and street smart kid. She grew up playing all over her block with different kids and had a fair amount of freedom. She knew her own phone number, she had been taught not to get in the car with strangers, and she knew the basics of staying safe around cars and other people in the busy city neighborhood. She figured Equilla would be back soon, and she saw her as she disappeared around the corner. What Equilla Hodrick did not realize in that moment is that she would never see her daughter again. Terry Hodrick started to grow restless as the evening wore on. A cousin passed by and said she had seen Equilla playing at the local arcade, which was also around the corner. When the evening continued on and Equilla had not returned home, Terry knew something was wrong. Part of being street smart meant that Equilla always stayed in touch with her mother about her whereabouts and didn't stay out late on the streets. So Terry phoned NYPD, and to their credit, they responded quickly and took it very seriously. Given the age of the girl and the circumstances, right from the get-go, they treated this as an abduction. When Equilla had run off, she was wearing a tank top with yellow and red marks, blue cut-off denim shorts, and light blue sneakers. She wore glasses, which was difficult because all of the pictures distributed of Equilla were of her without glasses on. She was a little on the taller side for her age, standing about 4'11", and weighed 80 pounds. She had a small gap between her two front teeth, a scar near her right eye, and a scar on her right cheek. She was a light-skinned black girl with hazel eyes and curly dark brown hair. She had an absolutely beautiful smile, and if you look at pictures of her, she had this little twinkle in her eye as well. One of the assigned detectives was a man named Frankie McDonald. He came from a family of law enforcement officers. Immediately, he was determined to bring Equilla home, and this was music to Equilla Hodrick's ears. She referred to Equilla as her baby to Detective McDonald and told him that she was a sweet, responsible, well-behaved girl and that this was out of character for her. She told him how every night her and Equilla said prayers together, and after Equilla would crawl into bed, she would stroke her hair and rub her back. As Terry got further along in her pregnancy, Equilla helped her mom however she could to make things easier on her. Detective McDonald felt awful for the woman standing before him, asking him to do anything to find her 8-year-old. So he pulled in all the resources, but one resource that wasn't really picking up the case too much was the media. We all know too well the discrepancies in media coverage when a black child versus a white child goes missing. There's other instances of these discrepancies too, such as men versus women going missing. But make no mistake, race has always been a factor. Nowadays, large media companies have tried to right-side this, as well as independent media outlets, podcasts, and the like, but we still have a long way to go. So McDonald did what he otherwise could. First, he and the other detectives working the case located the ice cream truck vendor. When shown Equilla's picture, he said he didn't recall serving her. This could mean a lot of things. Was he just so busy that day and the ice cream was so in demand that he didn't remember her as a customer, but she did actually come? Did Equilla never make it to the ice cream truck? If so, was that because she changed her mind and went over to the arcade or caught up with other friends or wasn't able to get any money? Or was she abducted before she got to the ice cream truck? One thing of note is that police have said The cousin sighting at the arcade was never officially verified, and some of the questions that I don't have answers to when it comes to the cousin was if this was an adult cousin, if it was a child cousin who could have maybe mixed up the time, was nobody else able to confirm Equilla was there? Are they just not sure that the cousin sighting was accurate? We don't know, and because it's still an open case, investigators haven't divulged that information. Equilla disappeared on a Monday, and McDonald and his partner, John Boris, set up a temporary hub at Torona Hodrick's home. This was the checkpoint and allowed Torona to stay in the loop of everything they were doing. They enlisted helicopters and sent dogs. Initially, this didn't go anywhere. Each day that turned into another evening, Terry Hodrick grew scared at what this meant. She told herself that a woman must have abducted Equilla, someone who couldn't have a child of her own and wanted to raise a daughter. The two detectives felt much less likely that this was the case. On Friday the 16th, detectives caught a break when scent dogs tracked Equilla's scent to Webster Avenue. The dogs went up to a large hole in the fence by the Metro North train line. Detectives soon learned that this large hole was used to get to a homeless encampment. Finding this out, they wondered if Equilla had been abducted and taken there, and they wanted to search the area for signs of her. But to do this, they would need permission from Metro North to search, and the trains would have to be stopped. Metro North sent a representative to talk to McDonald and his commander. This person basically said it would be a huge inconvenience to the commuters, and that this decision wasn't one he alone could make. A higher-up did eventually approve of the request and cut the power. However, police took longer to investigate than the time that was first agreed upon, and power was not restored until 4:30 p.m. on that Friday. This did end up stopping 15 Metro North commuter railroad trains, 7 heading north from Grand Central Station, and 8 heading south. Service didn't fully return to normal until around 6 p.m. This angered enough people that it became news in several papers the next day, and reporters were demanding interviews. This is actually when Equilla's name made the papers. But Equilla and her story was still secondary to the story about the train delays. Finally, a fed-up McDonald said to a reporter, quote, "What is your story? That an 8-year-old girl is missing, or that a few assholes from Westchester came home to a cold dinner? I don't have anything more to say to you." End quote. The detectives were able to talk to several people in the tunnels, but they didn't get any further on locating Equilla herself. The formal command center in the Hodrick home wrapped up after the first couple of weeks. Still, McDonald checked in daily, stopping over to come and give some updates. Soon, Terry Hodrick would give birth, and in her deep appreciation for the work Detective McDonald was doing for her daughter's case, she named her son after him. She would later say in an interview, quote, "I thought that the police did all they could to find my child. They worked hard, especially Frankie McDonald. They searched every apartment building around here from Valentine Ave to Webster. They really looked for Equilla, and for that, I am grateful." And she can speak to it personally. For weeks as they searched abandoned buildings, businesses, and apartment buildings, Torona Hodrick would ride along in the squad car. In 1986, Torona Hodrick was interviewed in an article about 6 other kids abducted from New York City since 1979, the Unlucky 7 as they were called. 2 of them were later connected as possible victims of the Staten Island serial killer Andre Rand. In fact, I have some other cases connected to him, and a future episode planned out about his potential victims who have never been found. In this interview, Torona Hodrick discussed how she had a reoccurring dream where Equilla would visit her and run up and give her a big hug. Each time she would be so sad and upset to wake up from this dream. She said, quote, "I know she's out there somewhere, and I hope that someone is taking care of her. She'll come back to me. I know it." End quote. And this was kind of a theme from her mother. Her mother would often say that as a mother, you can just feel these things, and she could just feel that her daughter was still alive and out there and not dead and buried somewhere. That was kind of the language she would use. Months went by, and Detective McDonald kept his presence in the neighborhood. Aquilla's missing flyers stayed on the windows of local businesses, and as McDonald passed through, people would ask if they had any updates. But he wouldn't have any for them. That was until several months later when he attended a local block party and got a fresh lead. McDonald attended a neighborhood block party on East 194th Street on the summer after Equilla's disappearance. Also, there was a local politician present who introduced McDonald and how to contact him if there were tips about Equilla's disappearance. As the festivities wound down, McDonald walked back to his car, and on the way there was a woman who appeared unhoused. She was rifling through garbage, and she was mumbling under her breath, and she said, "You know, you're never going to find that girl alive. She's buried up in Yonkers." This woman wasn't really coming off as a reliable narrator at face value, so he just kept walking initially. But as he got back to his car, it hit him. Yonkers rang a bell for him because it had been the place Terry Hodrick's ex-boyfriend lived. Terry and this man, whom I'll call Marcus, dated for a while, but she broke it off with him because of his drug use. Terry was not a drug user, and she did not want her daughter exposed to that lifestyle. McDonald tried to go back to speak to the woman, but she was gone when he got back there. He then actually tried to find her for weeks and months, but he never saw her again. Undeterred, he did bring this man in for questioning on more than one occasion, and he interrogated him. As it turns out, on the evening of Aquilla's disappearance, Marcus was spotted running shirtless down Hoe Avenue, and this is a few miles away from the Hodrick residence. So it's not exactly a slam dunk, but he was also seen riding in a vehicle with his roommate, so it's definitely easier to get further across town when you have a vehicle. McDonald, as I mentioned, interrogated Marcus several times, even thinking he might confess at one point when he was brought to tears. But he simply said through his tears that he did not do anything to Equilla. So, it's hard to say. You know how there's definitely that interrogation tactic where you can just wear people down and it's not exactly a reliable confession. And we know there's a lot of people in jail for doing things they didn't do because of a false confession when they were under duress and just psychologically breaking because of the pressure police were putting on them. So it's hard to say if that was the case here. We just know that McDonald definitely got some weird vibes from him after this and got the sense that he might confess at one point, but he never did. In 1986, Equilla's case was featured on the TV show Missing, Have You Seen This Person? It was produced by the same people as the show Unsolved Mysteries, and it was considered the precursor to that show. They did, just like Unsolved Mysteries, they did dramatic reenactments, and leads did come in, but they dried up pretty quickly. By 1987, the veteran detective was set to retire. The day before he did so, he picked up Aquilla's investigation box of documents one last time to go through them, and it was 25 pounds at this point. McDonald felt it was the great disappointment of his career to not close Equilla Hodrick's case. When he told Torona Hodrick that he was retiring, she didn't cry. She simply said, "Well, that's the end of it." She had little hope that whoever took over would put in the same effort as McDonald. He would go on to later say that the NYPD did everything they could to solve Aquilla's case, both during his time there and after, but he did admit that not many new leads came after his retirement. In 1999, a cold case task force was formed and Aquilla's case was given another look. But it didn't yield any real breakthroughs. In 2000, her case was featured on America's Most Wanted. Tips again came in, but nothing that pushed the case forward. And since then, there has been very little movement. Detective McDonald was actually temporarily pulled out of retirement on special assignment for a moment, and it was examined whether her case was connected to some other missing persons cases in the area of other children, but it was determined it wasn't, so that was just another dead end. This year will mark the 40-year anniversary of Aquilla's case, and she would be turning 49 years old if she were still alive. Before I wrap up her case, I think it's worth discussing a few possibilities. Was Equilla lured away by someone she knew? Someone like Marcus? Is the Yonkers rumor true? One thought I had was Equilla running up towards the ice cream truck without money and the scenario that could set up. Did an opportunistic predator see that she wanted ice cream and that she didn't have any money and use this as his in? Something that points to this theory for me is the sighting at the arcade. If she didn't have money from her mother for ice cream, how would she have arcade money? This act of building up her trust could have made the 8-year-old let her guard down, regardless of how street smart she was. All it would have taken was that in the moment grooming where it's, hey, I'll get you ice cream, and then following through and getting her ice cream, and I'll give you some arcade money. And she would have felt safe from those couple interactions. Again, no matter how street smart she was only 8 years old. It's worth noting that there were a couple other abductions in the Bronx of children around these years that she went missing. I know I talked about the Unlucky 7, and I'll actually post a picture of that article on our Instagram at simplertimecrimepod, but only some of them were actually in the Bronx, so I'll just mention those 2 cases. In 1983, an 11-year-old boy named Kirk Quintins departed his family's residence at noon. He was walking to the Top Tomato supermarket in the 800 block of Rosedale Avenue, where he earned money doing odd jobs. Kirk's mother sent him to the supermarket to buy her a can of soda, and he was last seen collecting bottles from a vacant lot near the store, which was 2 blocks from his home. He has never been seen or heard from again, and his case remains unsolved. In 1985, a 4-year-old boy named Jeremiah Huger was playing with friends outside his residence on LaFontaine Avenue in the New York City borough of the Bronx at 4:30 p.m. He was playing on the playground behind his grandmother's 3rd-floor apartment in the Twin Parks housing project, and she actually had custody of him. But on that particular day, his mom was over visiting, and his mom had been watching him out the window but then went to the store. When the grandmother called him in, he wasn't there, and she assumed he went to the store with his mother. But when the mother got back and they both realized they didn't have Jeremiah, they called police. He vanished from the playground that day. He has never been located, and his case is still unsolved as well. There aren't any major connecting pieces to these cases with Equilla's other than that they were young kids, presumably abducted from Bronx neighborhoods in the mid-'80s. If you have any information on the disappearance of Equilla Hodrick, please contact the New York Police Department at 212-694-7781. After this, I will be back with another case with some similarities. With the time we have left, I want to discuss another case, the case of Mikelle Biggs. Her case has had significant media coverage over the years, and for the sake of episode length, I'm going to do an overview of the case without quite as many nitty-gritty details as I would normally include. It's also not connected directly to the first case, at least it's not thought to be connected in terms of having the same perpetrator, but the circumstances are similar. Both girls were headed to an ice cream truck and seemingly abducted, and both families are still awaiting answers. So media coverage or not, it doesn't make it any less painful for the family who has lost their little girl, especially when in the end they're in the same position, waiting for someone to be held accountable. So her story still deserves to be told. Mikelle Biggs was a 6th grade honor student living with her family in Mesa, Arizona. At 11 years old, she was an artsy student and wanted to be a Disney animator when she grew up. According to her mother, Tracy, she was also a huge bookworm, and if she wasn't outside with her sister and friends, you'd find her cozied up with a new book. She was musical and excelled at the clarinet. She was involved in everything at school. She was a part of the Future Scientists and Engineers of America Club and was part of the school government. On the evening of January 2nd, 1999, Mikelle was riding bikes around the neighborhood with her sister Kimber. It was around 6 p.m. when Mikelle and Kimber heard an exciting noise. the sound of an ice cream truck. The two girls ran back to their house to get money from their mother and go wait for it. And they weren't alone. Other kids piled to the corner of East El Moro Avenue and South Toltec Street, but for whatever reason, the ice cream truck didn't seem to be coming. Some kids were skateboarding, and Mikelle and Kimber were just riding their bikes in the area, and Kimber would say that Mikelle was just riding her bike kind of in a circle, waiting. After a bit, the other kids gave up, and it was just Mikelle and Kimber left. Despite the Arizona heat, it can get chilly there in the evening, and Kimber was getting chilly, so she went back inside to grab a coat. When she told her mother the ice cream truck hadn't come, her mother said that it probably just wasn't going to come tonight and that it was time for dinner anyways, so to just go get your sister and come back. Kimber went outside and started yelling for her sister to come, but she didn't see her. Then, as she looked down towards the block where they had come from, she saw something lying in the road near the corner. As she approached, there was no sign of Mikelle anywhere, but her 2 quarters were laying on the ground, and the bike was tipped over with the back wheel still spinning. That imagery has always haunted me when I think about this case, so I can't imagine how it must live in Kimber's head. Kimber was 9 years old at the time. Tracy came out briefly, and upon seeing the scene, she knew something was wrong. After verifying that Mikelle was not at the neighbor's house, she called police. She also called members of her church to come help look for Mikelle, and within minutes, there were dozens of church members and police on scene. Police did an exhaustive search, and it's considered one of, if not the biggest search in Arizona state history, and certainly for the city of Mesa. There was door-to-door searches, helicopter flyovers, scent tracking dogs, you name it. The FBI was brought in almost instantly. Police considered a possibility that Mikelle's case was connected to another abduction that occurred on Christmas Day just before her disappearance, and less than a mile apart. In that case, a man lured a young girl behind an apartment complex on the 600 block of South Shapley Drive. The man demanded the young girl perform oral sex on him. She was able to escape before that occurred and without further harm. She worked with authorities to come up with a composite sketch. The ages of the victims, both being little girls, both being so close in proximity, and the fact that this just generally didn't happen in this area, they had to consider that these were probably, or at least very possibly, connected. I'll have a picture of the composite sketches and proximity to the scene on our Instagram at simplertimecrimepod. Police were able to retrace the steps in timeline and determine that Mikelle Biggs was alone on the street for 90 seconds. Just imagine that. 90 seconds. And if you go Google Earth, I'll have another picture of this on the Instagram too. If you go to Google Earth and Maps and you look at this neighborhood, these houses are close together. You can tell it's well populated. It is certainly not an area you would immediately look at and think that someone could just be taken. A child could just be grabbed off the streets. But it goes to show you that predators need a very small window of time and opportunity. Something I thought about, and this is just my personal opinion, but the fact that it was just the 90 seconds, it makes me think that whoever did this was watching. Is it possible that it was opportunistic and the person just drove by during that window? Of course. But to me, just that small moment when it was just Mikelle, it makes me feel like someone was watching her. Scent dogs traced Mikelle for just a few feet, leading investigators to believe that she was pulled into a car. They talked to all the ice cream truck drivers in the area, and they were cleared of any suspicion. In questioning people door to door, one name raised a red flag for investigators. You see, living right in Mikelle's neighborhood under their noses was a level 3 sex offender. Sex offender registries only came out a few years before 1999. In fact, it was 1996 in Arizona, and people were still getting a handle on really navigating them to use for this purpose. And you have to remember the internet was not as big then, so going online to look up sex offenders in an online registry was non-existent. This man's name was D. Blaylock. Dee had an extensive criminal history, one that makes me wonder how he was even out of prison to begin with. He had 3 prior convictions for sexual assault, kidnapping, and child molestation. He lived across the street from where Mikelle took her piano lessons, and he was a neighbor to a close friend of Mikelle's. He also somewhat inserted himself into the investigation. If you look at early news footage of the neighborhood vigils of Mikelle, you'll see Dee Blaylock's face. He actually gets in front of the camera and says, "If I see something suspicious, I'd be calling 911. He actually mispronounces suspicious. It's kind of awkward, but he presents as an outraged community member just looking to keep his neighborhood safe. If you want to see that footage, check out the episode of People Magazine Investigates titled Gone in 90 Seconds. When police investigate him, they go pay him a visit. He says, "Yeah, no problem. Interview me. You feel free to search my house." He says he was watching football in his garage during the evening of Mikelle's disappearance, and his wife gave him that alibi as well. Blaylock did allow police to search his residence, and they didn't find anything significant. So they moved on, and over the course of the next several months, Mikelle's case started to grow cold. Then, a vicious attack in her neighborhood turned the case upside down. Just before the 1-year anniversary of Mikelle's abduction, a woman in Mikelle's neighborhood named Susan was attacked in her home. She had just gotten home and was walking through the front door into the kitchen, and little did she know that Dee Blaylock was hiding behind her fridge and masturbating. When she walked into the kitchen, he jumped out and attacked her. He pushed her to the ground, jumped on top of her, and violently sexually assaulted her. He then kicked her over and over again in the head with his steel-toed boots, leaving her for dead. He then took a pizza box and put it on the stove, turning the burners on. The pizza box never really caught fire, it just got smoky, and that smoke alerted neighbors who called for help. Susan survived her attack and recognized Dee Blaylock as the perpetrator. While she was in the ambulance, she described what she had as an epiphany. She said while she was lying there, feeling like she was dying, a voice and imagery came over her and told her that Dee Blaylock is who abducted Mikelle that day. She actually said this to the paramedics in the ambulance. While Dee was awaiting trial, police reinvestigated him in Mikelle Biggs' case. For his attack on Susan, Dee Blaylock was sentenced to 187 years in prison. With Dee behind bars, they decided to go back and talk to his wife. She shared that she was very afraid of Dee and she was submissive. She said that after delivering him beer to the garage that day, he told her to leave him alone. And so she went back into the house and she never did see him again that evening. So she truly couldn't serve as an alibi to his whereabouts. Dee Blaylock sat in prison, and on at least one occasion, it's alleged that he confessed to participating in Mikelle's abduction to a prison mate. But that isn't enough to bring him to trial, and he won't give up any more information. On one hand, if he did it, you'd think, why not? He's not getting out of prison anyways. But on the other, as we know how killers can be, he may view this as the last piece of control he has. In 2018, there was a small break in the case when currency was found with a handwritten note saying that the writer was Mikelle Biggs and that she's still alive. But the name Mikelle was spelled wrong, and the family said it was not her handwriting, so it's believed to have just been a cruel prank. Police continue to investigate Mikelle's case, strongly believing that Dee Blaylock is their number one suspect. But I'll leave you with a quote from Mesa Police Sergeant Kevin Baggs. He said to People Magazine, quote, "Everything in my eyes points in one direction, and that is Dee Blaylock. But I think it's equally important that we say it could be someone else. Until the killer, if it's not him, comes forward and leads us to her body, we may never get those answers." End quote. Mikelle's sister Kimber has gone on to use her experience for good. She presents to police departments on how to best support families going through a situation like hers. The Biggs family has also been working on participating in a documentary on Mikelle's case. Kimber runs an active Facebook page and is on social media campaigning for her sister's case constantly. She's honestly amazing from everything I can tell. At the time of this recording, Mikelle would be 37 if she were still alive today. While it's believed she is no longer alive, her body has never been found, and her family hopes to be able to lay her to rest and know what happened to her. In fact, on the 5th anniversary of her disappearance, they held a funeral with an empty casket. If you have any information on the abduction of Mikelle Biggs, please contact the Mesa Police Department at 480-644-2211. Thank you for joining me for another episode of A Simpler Time True Crime. If you appreciate the work I'm doing, please leave a 5-star review, follow and subscribe on your preferred podcast listening platform, and tell your friends to tune in. Word of mouth helps me so much. Source material is listed in the show notes, but note that because of character limitations, I'm not always able to list all my newspapers.com articles, so you can find all my clippings under public username A Simpler Time True Crime. For case suggestions, or if you're interested in me covering the case of a loved one, please reach out to simplertimecrimepod@gmail.com. And as always, thank you so much for listening.